It's a beautiful bacon day, Cookie Crusaders. Today I want to talk to you guys about resource management and how you can get your production queues fixed as best as possible for saving it for the Tree of Wishes, doing events. There's all sorts of reasons to have a good production queue, and we're just going to go through all the possible resources that you can have and the way I usually approach them. So, first thing I always consider is that how long can I be in the game? If I know I can be in the game for a long period of time and I want a lot of resources, then I would go with the first resource option. If I know that it's bedtime and I know that I'm not going to be awake for at least 4 to 5 hours, then I'll count up the time from the bottom resource if I've unlocked that, because you may have not unlocked that yet, and I will look at the time that it would take to do that as a full queue. Because if I wake up and I haven't had time to do any of the smaller resources, I could have at least made all the bigger ones by that point. So that is my first consideration. Second, I look at the time to gold ratio. So for instance, some of these lower resources, you're going to always be producing at a much faster rate than you are some of the higher resources. We'll get to those in a minute to show you the differences of those. So for instance, like lumber, we know that we can produce 9 logs in about 1 minute, because 3 times 3, 23 seconds times 3 is about 1 minute's time, give or take a little seconds. So with that in mind, I know I can produce it faster at the single rate point, and it's the same amount of coins. So it's not going to really hurt me to use the first production queue. However, that means that I'd have to for sure be in the game for the next minute and be ready to collect those resources. If I wasn't, if I was going to jump out and do something else, then maybe I would do 3 of the middle row logs, because then I would be doing about 12 minutes for 3 of them, or 20 minutes for 5 if that's what your queue point is, and then I know I'll be making that amount of wood. And so that's something I consider with the lower resources. Same goes for the jelly beans. They're a little bit different in time here. So this one, still the same rule. It's going to be less time and the same amount of coin to produce a single jelly bean versus doing the middle row, because doing singles I can do in about 2 minutes for 9, where it takes 9 minutes for a stack of 9. And so if I need to produce a bunch really fast, I will definitely go with that first queue, but only if I have the time. Now when we get over to the sugar, this one's a little bit harder. And the reason is that you start to get in much longer periods for sugar, because it takes 3 minutes to make 9 sugar at the single point, and then 10 minutes for a 9 on the regular. And so here you've got a big enough gap where you're really going to make a huge benefit making single sugars if you've got the time in the game. So right now I know I'm doing some stuff in a little bit, so therefore I'm making these stacks, because it's going to take about an hour just to get all of those done, where it would only take about 10 minutes to get a full stack queue of the singles done, and I'd be on to moving up to more. So the flour, though, this is where it changes up a little bit more. So now you can do 3 stacks of flour, the single biscuit flour, and make 9 flour in 21 minutes. But if you do the second row, it will take 18 minutes. So if you think about that, this is one of the unique situations where you should technically always be running the middle row if you can. Running the first row, yes, you have more chances to be in game and be optimally collecting that, but it's not saving you coins by changing to the first option. So the second option is going to get you the most amount of flour in the least amount of time, but you have to be vigilant on the collecting of it. If you go to do a 20 stack, you're only getting just over double, and it's taking more than 5 times the amount of time. So the biscuit flour stack is the one I go with, almost all the time for flour because that's just the most optimal amount of time spent for the amount of resources that you can get. The same is actually going to be said for the jellyberries. It takes 13 minutes for 2, and to 6, 30 minutes. If you times by 3 for the first stack, you have 36 minutes. So that means, once again, you will spend the same amount of coin and spend less time doing a jellyberry basket instead of just a single jellyberry. So I would recommend the second option if you want to optimally produce resources for the jellyberries. With milk, we're going back to the original formula. Milk, you want to produce the single stacks if you are free to collect in game. If not, produce the second ones. I almost never produce the third stack, the milk carts, because if I was to do 4 of those, it would take half a day, and I'm only producing 3 more than the second stacks. So optimally, in an hour, you can produce 6 with a single stack versus 5 for an hour and a half. So you will produce more with the single stacks. And as you can see, since I haven't had time to be in game all day, I haven't had the ability to get my milk production very high, and so I'm struggling a little bit on that. If we go over to the cotton, the same is, this one's about the same either way. It's an hour and 8 minutes or 2 hours and 19 minutes for 2. You're going to spend the same amount of coins. It's a 3-minute difference. And if you go to the one that has the 3 stacks, 3 for 3 hours and 35 minutes, that one's just a tiny bit more. But really, you're going to spend about the same amount of time in all situations for the candy wool. So just depends on really when you want to come back and collect for this one. That one you can't really do much good optimization for in any instance. Now here, these are different categories, so it's really hard to define either one of them being more optimal than the other as far as production time. So this really comes down to this building. How quickly can you come back and collect things? That's really what that boils down to. If you can get these new upgrades for the 10 stacks of the axes, the pickaxes, the saws, and the shovels, if you can get those upgrades like I have here, you're going to really benefit from them. It gives you the exact same amount of time of resource and the exact same amount of cost of resources in the exact same amount of time as if you were to produce 10 of them on their own. So really, this is great if you're not able to come back, because micromanaging this building is probably one of the hardest buildings, and it's probably one of the most used resources throughout the entire game. So I recommend, if you can, get this building upgraded as soon as possible to the max levels so that you can make these different 10 stacks, because I used to never be able to get well over 100 robust axes because it was hard to sit in game for, well, 23 seconds for one. So you'd have to spend 2 minutes just sitting there ready to collect 10 of those. It's 100% doable, but unless you have that focus and that attention for it, it's best to just upgrade to these points and just run these 10 stacks, because 22 minutes for 10 of those versus 23 seconds for one. So it's going to work out about the same. As far as the jams, same kind of concept here. You can't really maximize or minimize which one is going to be faster for the amount that you're spending. Honestly, it's just what resource you think you need. I recommend getting at least 50 of every item if you can, so that way as you need it for more items, you can produce more while spending them at the same exact time and not feel like you're going into a huge deficit. And so same thing goes for here. Try to get 50 of each. My next thing to work on is collecting and making a bunch of these. When you get down to the last item, the high level upgrade items, if you don't have them yet, don't worry about them too much. But if you do have them, try to get at least 10. 10 is a good number. It's hard to get that many in a short amount of time. You're going to be spending a lot of hours, a lot of resources, a lot of time. Try to get about 10 of them. And so this one, as you can see, I haven't even gone for the golden croissant. There's been no need. There's been no requirement. I just haven't gone for it. If you don't have to upgrade that far, don't. But if it's a requirement and you need the building or something, I can understand why. But if you don't have to upgrade, don't go for it. As these resources, you can see it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources to pull these out. So it can be pretty tough, especially when there's so many options and so many of them to produce. It's hard to keep them within that 50 plus range of resources. Most of these were in decent shape, but that last spring event definitely drained a lot of resources, so it made it really hard. When it comes to the stew burger and candy pasta section, this one's pretty tough. I don't know if I'll ever upgrade to get the fancy jelly bean meals, because they take 5 hours a piece and they take a good amount of resources to make as well. So that is something I'm avoiding for as long as I can. The pizzas I did upgrade for specific upgrades on buildings, so that's why I got those. But yet again, just another resource that takes a little bit to make, a little bit of time, a little bit of extra resource. And as you can see, I'm trying to make at least 50 of each item here, so that way I'm in good shape for when more requests come in from the tree or things come in from cookies or whatever resources needed. So I'm just trying to keep in a line with all of those resources. With here, the colorful bowl I do have on this side. I don't get to make it much because it takes nearly 4 hours for one of them, and the resources it takes is the pomegranate jam, which also takes a good amount of time to make. So this one's a bit hard for this one. If you don't have to upgrade to that one, try to steer away from it. The gleamy beads are not so bad, but the colorful bowls, they're pretty tough. Here, as you can see, I'm definitely running low on the biscuit planters, and that's because I've been using them to make a lot of the candy flowers. Once again, 50 of each item, best as you can. I did get one of these buildings upgraded all the way to the wreaths. Yet again, a hard resource to produce because you need pizza specifically to upgrade it. It's pretty tough. When it comes to the cream and butter and the homemade cheese section, this is all you can upgrade. The resource itself, it's not too taxing, but it does take a good amount of milk away, but it's more time. So these resources just take a lot of time to make, even with a lot of upgrades. So just be ready for that if that's something you're going to go for, because they are just going to soak up a lot of time for how long they take. And it just gets further and further the further we go down the list of resources. The jam or sweet berry juice, it's fine on resources. Bubbly tea, not too bad either. The jelly bean latte, I have 180 of them, so I'm not going to really worry about producing more of those at the time. But any of these, the biggest reason these are helpful is they help with the trade harbor a lot. They make trading really, really easy in the trade harbor. So they're not worthless to upgrade to, especially if you're trying to save up for legendary soul stones. So that would be one reason why these would be actually worth upgrading to. And so we're going to leave these alone. I'm just going to make some jam right now because I have the resources to do that. But I'll do one boba tea as well. The cloud pillows, I did have like 300 at one point. They're pretty easy to make, actually. As if you can manage your flour and your cotton candy pretty well, the cloud pillows are a very, very good resource. I actually recommend making like hundreds of these because in the trade harbor, you can trade up to 30 at a time, and it gets like half of the trade harbor taken care of. And so you can't trade more, sadly, otherwise it would take care of all of it. But you can make a lot of cotton pills. It does take time, but they do really well in the trade harbor. Really, really well. So I think they're like the best trade harbor resource. As far as the root beers and red berry juices and the Vignetti or vintage root bottle, all super expensive resources for what they're asking. Just needing the bear, needing the flowers, needing the cupcakes, and how much of the base materials they're needing for one each and the time, they're just super expensive across the board. They are really, really strong in all of the trade harbor deals that you can get, but beyond that, they're just expensive resources. And then last but not least, we're going to cover the glazed rings and the brooch and the crowns. These are luxury pieces. If you can get these made, they're going to be very powerful for trades, very good for Tree of Wishes to get you a lot of coins, a lot of experience. But they're the most time consuming, the most labor intensive resources that they're requiring, both on base and secondary. So if you go for these, please don't think that you're going to be stacking up hundreds of them, because if you are, that means you're not using them for any of the purposes that they can be built for. And if you do it, great, but it's a big resource and it takes a lot of time. I mean, even to make 20 of the crown would take more than a week. Just on time alone. Not even on resource, but just on time. So consider how long it will take to make all these resources and how worth it is for your trade harbor and your Tree of Wishes and the other things you can use resources on. But let me know in the comments what your production queue is, what you think you prefer to do, and how you like to run it. And thanks so much for stopping by, and you guys have a wonderful night.